Welcome to a Life Under Construction podcast. I'm your host, Rhoda Daniel, and I am extremely grateful to have you here with me today. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or watching on YouTube, welcome, and I hope this podcast gives you the tools that you need to live the life that you are meant to live. Today, I'm just trying to ensure that my voice doesn't crack because I've been talking a lot last week. And whenever I talk a lot, my voice goes bye-bye. And it's almost gone. But I've been trying to give it a little bit of rest this weekend, except for filming this podcast, which I love doing. And then I'll be back next week to, again, a lot of talking. So I'm not sure how I'm going to sound in this podcast or the next one. So please excuse me and ignore my voice. Getting back to today's topic, we will be talking about renewing our minds. I talked a little bit about this in episode 1. That was 6 episodes ago. Can you believe that we're already in the 7th episode of this season? And I've been posting every single week for the last 7 weeks, which is incredibly disciplined of me, I must say. But yeah, I post every Thursday at 7 p.m. IST. So if you still haven't subscribed or followed on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, please do, so that you'll be notified about a new episode as soon as it's out. But anyway, what I was trying to say is I talked about it in episode 1, which was on the topic of peace. And I talked about how to renew our minds by strengthening it with good. And even then, I knew that I needed to get a little bit deeper into this topic, and that's what we're going to do today. If you are someone who struggles with your thoughts, with overthinking, with anxiety, with fears, with these overwhelming thoughts that you can't seem to get rid of, then this episode is for you. We start with the understanding that our mind is a battlefield. There is a constant battle happening in our minds. And I must share my brother's poem again because it is so relevant to this and the basis of what we're going to talk about today. The mind is the place where battles are fought. You strengthen it with good for you to be a victor. You will let it be filled with evil for you to be a failure. There is a constant battle going on in our minds, and the only way to fight that battle, the only way to ensure that our thoughts are not overwhelming us, is by strengthening our mind with good and ensuring that our mind is not filled with evil. That means we need to be conscious of what we are letting into our minds so that our minds are renewed. The word renew in the dictionary means to make like new, to make something better. And all of us want our minds to be better, our thoughts to be better. So I'm going to assume that all of us therefore want to renew our minds. So how do we do that? To be honest, I myself didn't really pay attention to what was going in my mind. I knew what I was thinking. I knew my overbearing thoughts. I knew all my fears, all my anxieties. I didn't really spend time thinking about what was going in my mind until maybe a few years ago when I became conscious of the books I was reading. Now, books in itself are a good thing. I used to read both non-fiction and fiction without really bothering about the content of the books. Now, I was not reading any bad books per se, but what I realized is certain books triggered certain thoughts in me and certain emotions in me that were not there prior to reading that book. Until then, I hadn't really paid any attention to it because I just read for entertainment, I read for relaxation, I read for escape. So when I started seeing the link between reading a book and my thoughts and therefore my emotions, I decided one day to take a break from reading fiction books. I said, okay, let's just see what happens if I just stop reading these books and just focus on non-fiction books for a little bit. What happened was very, very surprising. But what happened was all those random thoughts, all those anxious, overthinking, overbearing thoughts, all those random emotions disappeared when I stopped reading those books. I became calmer, I became more at peace, and that's when I decided that I'm not going to read those books anymore. Now, if you had told me even 5 years ago that, Rhoda, you're going to stop reading novels altogether, I would have laughed in your face, because that was just not possible. Because I loved reading. I loved reading to escape. It was my way of relaxation. But once I knew that there was a direct link between reading something and how it impacted my thoughts, I had to give it up. I had to stop, because I didn't want to live with those thoughts anymore. Everything that we take in our lives is either good for us or bad for us. Just like food, it's either nourishing to our bodies or not nourishing to our bodies. It is up to us to know whether a certain type of food is nourishing our bodies or not, and then choose accordingly. Of course, there are certain foods that give us pleasure in the moment while eating it, but then later on we feel like crap. We feel horrible, and we wonder why we ate that in the first place. It's the same with what we are taking in. Everything that we take in is either good or bad for us, and sometimes it might feel good in the moment, it might give pleasure in the moment, but after some time we feel horrible and we wonder why we consumed that in the first place. Our eyes and our ears are constantly taking in so much, especially in the world that we live in. If we are not conscious of what we are letting in, we are just letting everything in. And no wonder our minds are a battlefield, because everything is in there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so, because we have let it in there, then our mind has to fight that battle about, okay, what is going to be the dominant thought today? What is going to be the dominant emotion today? And thus the battle continues. And it's an everyday thing. But when we are more conscious, when we take the time to be a little more conscious of what are we letting in, we can take the appropriate measures to block certain things before they enter our minds, so that our minds don't have to become a battlefield. Our minds don't have to fight so much to keep ourselves sane. One of the biggest things that we consume is television. Whether it is through YouTube videos, online platforms, or movies, we are constantly consuming things with our eyes. I know some of you might think that what you watch does not impact you, but Oscar Wilde said this a long time ago, and I believe it held true then and it holds true now. And he said that life imitates art far more than art imitates life. So when we watch something that's art, our life starts imitating that art without us even knowing it. I remember when I was a little girl, my parents were pretty strict with our television time. They had rules regarding what we watched, and one of the rules was you could only watch 30 minutes of television in a week. And even if you watch a movie, if they allowed us to watch a movie, it usually used to be something that they had seen before and they had pre-approved. And one of the movies they allowed us to watch was the movie called Spy Kids. Now I remember it was a nice kid-friendly movie that I watched. And even then, after watching that movie, I distinctly remember, I don't know how old I was, maybe like 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, something like that. I distinctly remember after watching that movie, I watched it one afternoon, I think. And when I was going out in the evening, I wanted to dress like a spy, because that movie was Spy Kids, and I was like, I'm also a spy. And I wore like black jeans and like a netted black top that I had. And then I had these like platform shoes that somebody had gifted me that I had never worn till then, because it was so uncomfortable. And I wore that and I went out to play. Now that is the most uncomfortable outfit to wear to go out to play. But because I was in that zone of that movie, I subconsciously somehow thought that I was also a spy, and I took on that attitude and I put on the clothes and I walked into the playground thinking, I'm a spy. So that is how subconsciously movies can affect us. That was just me as a kid, but that holds true as adults as well. You might have noticed that even in yourself, when you start talking like a character of a TV show that you're watching or you're binging on. You start having the attitude of someone that was on that TV show, someone you admired on that TV show. Your accent probably changes. The words that you use suddenly starts changing, and people start noticing a different air about you, and that's just because you've taken on that character. Life imitates art. But what happens if that character is an angry person or an anxious person? We start taking those characteristics as well, and we start behaving in that manner, sometimes without even realizing it. A lot of our fears stem from something that we have watched on television. Even in India, with all our TV shows about drama in the house, mother-in-law being like a villain and the daughter-in-law being like a victim, when you watch these shows, even if there is no drama in your house, even if everyone, including your mother-in-law, is the nicest person, because you have watched those shows, because you have that presumption in your mind that all mother-in-laws are evil, because that's what the TV shows showed you for years, you're going to assume that everything that she does is because she has some ulterior motive. And that's how drama and fights get created, even though they didn't exist. Life imitates art. So when you separate yourself from these TV shows, just try it for a little bit. Stop watching certain TV shows that you know is giving you anxiety, that you know is feeding certain fears of yours, and you might see yourself start feeling better. If you do, maybe that show was not for you. Maybe find another show that is more positive in nature, that adds more value to your life and doesn't give you these overwhelming thoughts. For a few months early this year, I stopped watching everything, and then I started in the middle, and again I've given it up again, where I've stopped watching anything except for a few movies here and there. And I have seen the difference in my life. I have seen the change in my thought process. You don't have to do what I did, but just be conscious of what you're letting in your mind and watch things that actually add positivity into your life. The other thing that we consume is social media. It is constantly in our hands and we are constantly consuming. Now, consumption and watching videos is not wrong in itself. It's good, you learn a lot. But what are you consuming? Are you doom scrolling on Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, which honestly does not really add any value to our lives? We just start somewhere. Maybe we start with something that is interesting for us. Maybe we're watching some recipes or we're watching some cat videos. I don't know. But we just end up on a completely different side of the internet that we did not intend to end up on, because we have no control over the algorithm. The algorithm is just feeding us things to keep us on the site, on the app. So we just end up somewhere and we don't realize the impact of what we are consuming. With social media, I realized this year that it was making me very anxious. It was giving me some thoughts which I didn't like. Thoughts of comparison or thoughts of jealousy that were not like me. So I decided to delete the app for a few months, and then I did get on the app again because I started this podcast and I needed to post about it. But I was a little more conscious of who I'm following on social media. I did like a complete purge of my social media to see what were the accounts I was following, because even though I did follow a lot of news accounts and stuff, I decided to get the news app rather than look at it on Instagram, because then you start with news and you end up completely in another location. So I did a complete purge. I ensured that I was not following accounts that did not add any value to my life, because sometimes we don't think about that. I don't know if you have thought about that. Are we following accounts of just these celebrity gossip pages which do nothing except for just feed our curiosity and tell us what a celebrity is doing, which shouldn't really matter? Are we following pages that just give us certain thoughts of comparison or lust or jealousy or anger when we look at those pages? Are we following accounts that are teaching us the wrong kind of things? Because there are accounts on social media telling you that it's okay to feel your feelings, express your feelings, not worry about the other person, and just say whatever you want to say depending on however you're feeling. So look at the accounts you follow. Follow people. Definitely you don't have to be like me who kind of deleted the app for a few months, but you can decide who you want to follow, and follow people who add positive things into your life, who are maybe accounts that are educational accounts, informative accounts, accounts that inspire, that encourage, that support, strengthen your mind with good. Even what we listen to, something like music, has an impact on our lives. Music is so powerful that it can change your mood within seconds of listening to it. But oftentimes, instead of using it to change our mood from sad to happy, we do it the other way around without even realizing it. Just hear me out. If you have listened to a sad song at a time in your life when you were not actually sad, you will know that you can become sad listening to a sad song. You might even be able to muster up some tears because all those memories of all the bad things that have ever happened to you will come up to the surface when you listen to a sad song. That is the power of music. So just imagine, one is that it can turn your mood from happy to sad in an instant. But if you are already sad, it forces you to remain sad because that is constantly what you are listening to, and it makes you even sadder. Music can even bring different thoughts into your mind based on what you are listening to. The lyrics of so many songs nowadays celebrate certain things that should not be celebrated. They celebrate violence, they celebrate lust, they celebrate rape, they celebrate self-harm. And that is the kind of music we are listening to without even realizing it, because sometimes we don't listen to the lyrics, we're listening to the beat. And the beat's good. Honestly, the beat's good. But the lyrics subconsciously enter our mind, even if we're not paying attention to it. And those are the thoughts that suddenly start growing because the seed has been planted in us through the music. I heard even a very famous musician, I think it was Cardi B, share about how a certain song that she was composing brought up, and she used the word demons in her head, which she had already killed. And what she meant by that were, there are certain things that we have already dealt with in our life. There are certain maybe traumas that happen to us, and there are certain situations and circumstances that we have dealt with already. But when we listened to certain songs, and like she said, thoughts started coming back again. And she was like, why are those demons coming up? Because I had already killed them. And that is the power of music. They can come up again. Thoughts that you thought that you left behind 5 years ago, 10 years ago, might start coming up again. And you start struggling with things that you have not struggled for in a little bit. You thought you overcame that, but it starts coming up again because of the kind of music that we listen to. Now, I'm not trying to scare you here by saying, oh, you have to be scared of everything, but you need to be conscious of things, because if we want our minds not to be a battlefield, if we can reduce the strain of the battle before the battle even begins, why wouldn't we do that? If we can ensure that the bad elements do not even enter our mind in the first place, why wouldn't we do that? Even the people we listen to have a big impact on our lives. We all know people who complain a lot, and if we spend time, a lot of time with those type of people, we end up complaining a lot as well. It's just so natural, because you are in the presence of someone who is constantly complaining. Naturally, your mind starts taking those thoughts, and then you find yourself complaining about your own life because you were in the presence of that individual. So who are those people who are the closest to you, and what are they talking about? Are they only gossiping or criticizing other people? Are they only talking negatively about everything in life, or are they talking something good? Be conscious of that, because you can start taking their thoughts into your mind, and again that starts feeding the thoughts in your mind, and then the battle begins. I'm not saying start cutting people out of your life. You can't do that all the time. Maybe sometimes you might have to do that if somebody is too unhealthy for you, but most of the times we can't do that because it might even be a family member. So in those times, limit the times with those people. Sometimes you might even need to tell them whenever you meet that these are not the kind of conversations that I would like to have. Let's talk about something else. You can say that in a very nice way, but do that because this is important for you. Many of you have asked me this question: how do we stop overthinking? How do we stop these overbearing thoughts? How do we stop these overbearing emotions that I just can't get rid of? It starts with strengthening your mind with good, and that includes even limiting our time with certain people who are not adding good into our life. Instead, they are adding evil. Complaining is evil. Gossip is evil. Criticizing other people is evil. Don't spend time with people who talk about other people. Spend time with people who talk about themselves, about their lives, about investing in their growth, in their development, in their learning. Those are the people you need to spend time with. That is what it means by strengthening your mind with good. We are unfortunately surrounded by a lot of bad things in the world. They might not be inherently evil things, but they are not good for us. We don't even need to go anywhere to find these things. We have it on our phones, and we can look at anything, listen to anything, talk to anyone in the privacy of our rooms, and no one will even know. But you will know, because there is a consequence to everything that you do. Like Newton's third law of motion, for every action there is equal and opposite reaction. For every choice that we make, there is an equal and opposite consequence. For everything that we do, for everything that we watch, for everything that we listen to, there is an equal and opposite consequence. So let's not forget that. I have experienced how it was to be controlled by my thoughts. I am someone who dealt with overwhelming thoughts all my life. But it was only when I started being more conscious about what I was letting in, what I was allowing to take root in my life, in my mind, that's when I found peace. That is when I found calm. That is when I found myself being able to fight those battles in my mind, because I had more good in my mind than bad. Because when there is more good than bad, the good overpowers the bad. But when there is more bad than good, the bad overpowers the good. I know it might sound a little bit extreme. Why do we have to be careful about everything? This is entertainment. But as Buddha said, we are what we think. And what we think comes from external stimuli. It comes from what we are watching, what we are looking at, what we are listening to, who we are listening to. It all comes from external stimuli. If we are what we think, wouldn't we want to be better? Don't we want to renew our minds, to have better minds, to have a better thought life? The only way to do this is by protecting what goes into our mind and by strengthening it with good things. The mind is the place where battles are fought. You strengthen it with good for you to be a victor. You let it be filled with evil for you to be a failure. My hope today is that each and every one of you who are still watching this podcast chooses to be a victor today. If you want to add something to this conversation, or if you have any questions, you can write to me at writetous@alifeunderconstruction.com or DM me on Instagram at alifeunderconstruction. Thank you for tuning into this podcast and for listening till the end. And I will meet you again next week to talk about another topic that will help you live the life you were meant to live.